Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhan saranang gacchami, Dhamman saranang gacchami, Sanghan saranang gacchami. You can never go wrong with a smile. Unfortunately, we don't often remember to give ourselves one. As a therapist, I used to tell my patients to have a small mirror before they leave their apartment, their house, right next to the door. They would normally ask, like, why? I have plenty of mirrors in the house, so why that particular? It doesn't matter the size or location even, but just to remind us to be grounded in occupying this body. We have so much going on in our heads. We're heavy, caught either in the past or in the future, which blocks us from being present to ourselves. And yet somehow we want to just waltz into this world and just have things turn out okay, or really good. It's almost like being on autopilot. For that reason, many people have a difficulty with this whole mindfulness thing. They don't know how to wrap their minds around it. For the last 10, 15 years at the very least, people have been using mindfulness in this or that. I have a friend in the US, she's also a therapist. She wrote a book on how to eat chocolate with mindfulness. You have people in the stock market just saying, how to make more money with mindfulness. It's a very lucrative thing. This, when you label that, you write on any topic you want, but you exclude the word mindfulness. And someone else does put that word mindfulness, how to repair your door with mindfulness. The one that just said how to repair your door won't sell as many books as yours. Yet, we keep beating around the bush and nothing is done. We never even come this close to what it means. So many people talk about mindfulness, and many teachers have struggled with that. The word in Pali is sati. When you decode it or dissect it, you will get this image of, definition of, to remember. But what? We're oblivious of our behaviors, specifically of our actions, starting with our thoughts. But that's too subtle, too refined. A little bit grosser level would be where our words are, our speech. How is it? You can have a better chance of holding the tail end of your sentences, better than your thoughts, at least in the beginning. But to catch the physical actions, the movements of the body, that's a lot grosser than the previous two, right? And that's why Lord Buddha started with Kayanupassana, which is the mindfulness that is established within this body. That's why we have the breathing. That's why I normally start with breathing as a good grounding for us. So what does that have to do with today's topic, which is about, in essence, urgency, creating a sense of urgency. In my book, I mentioned the statement how this practice is about no more delay. Procrastination is something that we each have a PhD in. I was going to say master's, but no. We each have a PhD in it. We come with so many different ways of delaying, even being mindful. A good exercise to keep you present is, could you right now just do a very quick body scan without looking and just locate your feet, how your feet are positioned, without looking, without moving them either. Can you tell the difference? Perhaps the pressure on one foot is a little bit different. Maybe it's tilted to one side. Maybe there's more weight on one versus the other. How about the way you're sitting right now? Your sit bones are positioned on the chair. Is there a difference in weight distribution? This is as you see, not something that demands a lot of energy from us. Right? How about your breathing? Can you tell if you're breathing from your right or left nostril? I'll give you a second. Or are you breathing from your nose versus your mouth? Which is a bad idea, by the way. The nose are there for a reason. We forget to connect with the body. We're too much caught up in here. What that means is we have severed ourselves from living. That's, by the way, why we have that mirror before you leave the house. To say hello to yourself. To smile to yourself. By the way, some patients would really put up a fight, in a sense, verbally, there's like arguing, why do I need to smile? People are going to think I'm crazy. I've had people who said that. I mean, yes, cultural elements could play into that, but I asked them, how does it feel when you're smiling versus when you're not smiling? When the corners of the lips are going south versus north. They've done research in different places around the world, and they've discovered that, in fact, parts of the brain that light up when you fall in love, or when you see a beautiful sunset or sunrise, or when you hold a baby, a newborn, or you see a loved one whom you haven't seen in ages, and you hug them. Those same parts of your brain light up when you are smiling for an extended period of time. Not bad. But we happen to doubt everything. Especially things that come easy. You mean to say I don't have to go to my psychiatrist to write me that prescription? I don't have to exert myself, put that much effort to feel good? That little exercise about just locating where your feet are, it didn't take any energy from you. I just had to give a prompt. That's it. So being mindful means you are giving yourself that prompt anytime you're aware. Anytime you're mindful of it. That's the remembering part. We are living while procrastinating. I'll do it later. Not now. I'm too busy. That's what I normally would get from students when I ask them to meditate. On retreats, I tell them to meditate more than, a certain amount of time. You have to sit for at least 30 minutes if you're an absolute beginner to really get some benefit out of it. And then they will go into 45 minutes. When I first started meditating, I couldn't sit for 5 minutes. And then I was curious how it would feel if I were to extend it, just push it gently by a second, 10 seconds, 35 seconds, 1 minute. Isn't that how muscles work? You cannot just go ahead and lift 100 kilos of, barbells or something that's so heavy when you don't have the muscles for it. So what I'm trying to say is we are overburdened with life. And the procrastinating bit is simply delaying our gaining of happiness from this thing called life. And that's why mindfulness is key. It's not because it's the in thing, it's the fad, it's the new thing that is out. We'll wait for the next fad to come in. It's not that. There's a statement that Lord Buddha would use to refer to him and his bhikkhus, his community. He would say, "We are the happy ones." Not the sad ones or somber ones, traumatic ones, the ones who are on some type of opiates or something. That's why you will never see a Buddha image where he's frowning. It's not possible. I think this one is not. No, he's not. So, there's a lightness to the practice. That's why so many people are stunned when I tell them to start with forgiveness instead of adding another criterion on their list of things to do. So, doing meditation in your daily life need not be another task. Do you approach an appointment you have with a loved one or a friend as, I have to check that box? Okay, fine. You don't do that. Or when you're really, really hungry and someone places a meal in front of you that you really love, a dish, something that you really enjoy eating, do you approach it with contempt? And that is the goal with which we practice. But we start with baby steps. And that's where your mindfulness needs to come in. I'm seeing a lot of serious faces, by the way. You can go ahead and relax. It's not that serious. Life is serious outside. Unfortunately, that's what they made us feel, especially the last 2-3 years. Last year I was in Malaysia and people were coming for the retreats or the Dhamma talks like this, and they were wearing 3-4, I'm not exaggerating, masks. I couldn't see, I was able to see the eyes, let alone the smiles. And then they would ask me questions like, I'm not getting it. Could you remove layers? And people would be sitting like a kilometer away from each other, in the Dhamma hall. I asked them, is any of you going to live forever? Have you ever heard of someone who lived forever? The Buddha died, And they go like, of course not. Then what's this whole fuss about? Relax. Relax. Soften. Soften your face. Soften your attitude about this thing called life. And if you're not happy, really don't step out of your door. You're doing us all a favor if you're staying home with that face. We had to have a pleasant, uplifting attitude as bhikkhus every time we stepped foot into the village to go on Pindapada, which is the alms collecting from people. Even though we don't look in people's eyes, when we're receiving the food, we still have that pleasant smile or demeanor about us. It's not a matter of life and death only, because obviously if you have this very somber, serious, almost threatening presence about you, I don't think the next day you're going to get that, bowl of rice or something. People are people. They want to feel safe. So one of the things about smiling is that it is present. It's present continuous. The ing part, it's beautiful. That's why I don't believe in the word effort. It's an efforting. It's not something that you do like last week, you're done, you're good. You don't have to worry about it. Smiling is a continuous thing, just like being mindful. And that is the surest way that you can anchor yourself in the present moment, instead of dwelling in the dead past and the not yet born future. Which, by the way, these are the two extremes of the pendulum where we are. When I was asking people, do you know of anyone who's alive, who's been alive forever, who's going to live forever? And they were saying no. What they're saying is, we live, Bhante, in these two extremes. And this path is not about extremes. No. The term that Lord Buddha used is Majjhima Pada, which means middle path. And that is what we have forgotten. If you could just remember that from Buddhism, from the Dhamma, and you really understand what it means, and see an equal sign between that and your life, you start breathing a little bit better. You don't take yourself so seriously. I think that's a good thing, right? But it's easier said than done. One of my teachers used to say, Bhante Punnaji, years ago, he would say, he's now dead. I don't use soft language, by the way. I don't say passed on, moved on to another. No, just say it like it is. He used to say, people have somehow confused happiness with pleasure. I mean, that's what they sell us, day and night. Buy this car and you'll be happy. Fall in love with these new blinds for your windows. What? Love? Happiness? Because of that, we have turned this life that we have into a maximization of pleasurable moments and minimization of moments where we have pain. Remember that bit about the pendulum's extremes? Maybe now would be a time for me to do some board. The other day I was doing this in Malaysia and people really liked it, so that's why we have, I want to say some things on the board. So, because I used to be a high school teacher and a college professor later, but I used a lot of the board, real estate. And students really loved it. And because there's many types of learners among us. So visual, auditory, conceptual, abstract, etc., kinesthetics. So let us, we'll go there, but I think I'm going to have to, doesn't need anything. Okay, so meanwhile this will run. Okay, so, all right. So I was mentioning about, I'm sorry, I have my back to you. My mom used to say, a flower doesn't have a front side or a back side. It worked for me. Interestingly enough, it was always when she had her back against, to me. All right, so pleasure. And pain. In the Dhamma we have two words. The one for the first noble truth, which is dukkha. And the other one is the opposite. You just remove, it turns into sukha, which is happiness, pleasant experience. So it's the opposite of dukkha. So when we turn our lives into just it's like a ping pong, it just keeps going back and forth. No wonder we have so much frustration. Even in a child these days, there's so much anger and angst, anxiety. I have colleagues in the US who are very quick at diagnosing children with anxiety, ADHD, ADD, ODD. Different, these are DSM terms, Diagnostical and Statistical Manual, which started when a manual that started when it was about this thick, really thick pages, about 20, maybe 30 years ago. And then DSM-2, DSM-3, DSM-4, DSM-5, and the pages got thinner. Now they're almost see-through. Newer and newer, newer and newer. Stigmatization, diseases. A person's legs move, okay, you got, restless leg syndrome, thank you. The child wants to run, they can't sit still, oh, you have ADHD or ADD. Let the kid run around a little bit. Give them things to do. Let them play in the yard. No. We're basically creating a newer generation of ourselves. We're frustrated and we are causing children to be frustrated. Thanks to the masks I was mentioning, across the globe I've noticed how kids now have a speech impediment. When I say impediment, I mean they have an accent in their own native tongue. They don't have any physical, biological problems. But because they were watching mom and dad speak with a mask in the house, now the child no longer can speak fluently their own mother tongue. And this is only a very thin, very not as significant as the damages that are being caused to the newer generations of humans that are coming up the line, the conveyor belt, I would say. So people have lost the joy of living. Pleasure and pain. If you've lived on this planet for even a short while, you know that the odds of you experiencing pleasure all the time are not as good as the odds of you experiencing painful experiences. This is a fact. But somehow we have been convinced that we have to constantly go back to this. Meanwhile, life comes and knocks on the door and says, excuse me, you stubbed your toe and there's this pain. You're going to have to deal with that. We want a quick fix, quickly. Give me that Panadol, give me this, give me, where could I go so that this thing could just vanish? A child yells and screams and we want to put a muffle, a nozzle, something on the mouth of the child to make them just, oh, the tube, the digital nanny, Disney. And there we go, we are creating newer consumers. I used to buy DVDs. I used to take my nephews when they were kids, when I was a layman, and to the movies, because they would know which movie is going to be out. So they would say, Uncle, take me to this movie. So I would take them. And then 4 or 5 months or 6 months later, the movie would come out in DVD or Blu-ray. Okay, They get that, and they would put it into the machine, and guess what happens for the first 15, 25 minutes? Advertisements of things to come. So the child is now being trained to go here, to pleasure land. Seek that constantly, constantly, constantly. Well, there's this thing called the neutral. Remember I said the bit about Majjhima Pada, the middle path? This is where it is. 99.999 ad infinitum % of life happens here. Many people don't understand this, and that's why they call Buddhism a pessimistic religion. Unfortunately. That's a major misnomer, major misrepresentation of the Dhamma. Because Lord Buddha taught two things. If you narrow down what we call the 84,000 teachings, the original teachings of Lord Buddha, you get two things. Lord Buddha taught the presence of suffering, and he also taught us the way out of suffering. Freedom from suffering. So that means dukkha, and then also nirodha. When you break down nirodha, the word nirodha, you would get something like out of prison. I like to call it out of Shawshank, if you've ever seen the movie. Out of prison. Ni is a prefix that is used as a nullifier, an antonym, as it were. A way out of suffering. Who would enjoy really going back and forth? Really? But when we have been taught that the only way you could be happy is if you sought, if you ran after more and more pleasures, then the child is going to think that's the only way until they come to a meditation class. Or they read a segment from the Dhammapada where Lord Buddha says, Mano pumbangama dhamma, mano setha mano maya. All things are led by the mind. Mind is chief. Mind-made are they, everything. Everything we have. And then you have law of attraction, you have all these things that showed up during the past decades. We've been told about that for centuries. The mind, take care of the mind and it will take good care of you. But you're not going to be taking care of it if you keep running back and forth into this. You can think of this also in terms of, we can just change these, the words. Pleasure could easily be future. We can talk about that, future, and conversely, we can turn pain into the past. This would be another pendulum, as you could see. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Trauma patients are known for this. Not just trauma patients, only those who have experienced, let's say, severe, like a car crash, or have survived wars, or been injured severely, or traumatic experiences, as we would usually term them as. Now I look upon this whole planet, 8 billion, I think, give or take a few 100 million of us, and see that we've all been traumatized. We have worries constantly. We're so serious with ourselves. Not many people are smiling. And for good reason. Good reason, because how could you? There's a sense of safety missing. A child, when they're born, when they're running around the adults, they're looking for safety. They're looking for security from adults. Okay? We all have some safety issue as individuals. It's funny because as a couples therapist, now I can't practice as a couples therapist as a bhikkhu, but as a couples therapist, you see people would come into the sessions and they're looking at the other person and with disappointment, often in their eyes, looking for the things that they never got, specifically the sense of safety. As a collective, as a whole population of the planet, we have lost that sense of safety these last few years. So we need to now, especially, really anchor ourselves in the sense of joy. How do you do that? Is it something that I keep saying it to myself like a mantra? May I be happy, may I be happy, may I be happy, may you be happy. It never works. That's not metta practice. If, like I've mentioned in the book somewhere, if someone comes to you in need of, and you know they're really honest people, reliable people, they're not going to abuse your trust. They come and ask you for $100, and you reach into your pocket, into your wallet, and you can't find that. What do? Do you create it out of thin air when you don't really have it? So first we must bring it up within us. We have to feel metta, loving kindness. And fortunately, all of us have had, at least at one point or another, some sense of safety somewhere, somehow, some time ago. It could have been 2 seconds ago, where you felt comfortable. Maybe when you were swimming somewhere, or when you were, I don't know, someone gave you a flower, or someone looked at you and they didn't want anything back. They just gave you. They were generous with their smile. And that made your day. Or when you were running across the field, or walking barefoot on wet sand, or on freshly cut grass. Barefoot. I mentioned once how in my culture, my heritage, I guess, Armenian culture, it's so it doesn't happen where a male turns to another male and says, "I love you." There's, it doesn't happen. Family members, you don't see that. So I felt so much love for my father because my mother had already passed. She had died about, I think at that time it was 15 years already. So I was at a conference, and the person who was conducting that bit of the conference / retreat said something that really triggered tremendous emotion towards my father. I felt I have to reach out to my father. And this was before the age of cell phones. And I started really fretting that, worrying whether I would make it back in time to Los Angeles to go and see my father, to say to him, "I love you." So in those days, I started planning. I said, okay, the moment the retreat is over, I'm going to go to the nearest phone booth. I'm going to call my brother, so we're going to start organizing this picnic, and I'm going to take my dad. I started planning the whole thing in my head. And then when I was back and I did get to go to the picnic with my family, I pulled my dad away from my brothers and the rest of the family, and he started worrying. He's like, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Do you need money? Something happened. What happened? Are you in trouble? Don't worry." I said, "Dad, it's okay. It's okay. I just have to say something." And then he's now, his heart is racing. I'm worried for him. I said, "Dad, I'm going to take off my shoes and my socks, and I'm going to invite you to do the same because it feels great. Trust me. Walk on the grass." It was across from a lovely area across from a lake. So my dad didn't go for the taking of the shoe part and the socks. So I turned towards him and I held his hands, and now he's really worried. What is he going to say? What's going to come out of his mouth? And I said, Dad, all these years, you took care of us. You never let us go to bed hungry. We lived through a 17-year war in Lebanon. And many other things that he was there for us. I said, I never properly thanked you. And the best way I could thank you is to tell you I love you. And we both broke into tears. I still remember that. That was nearly 30 years ago. I'm so grateful that that moment was lived. It was uncomfortable, I guarantee it, because, well, it's uncomfortable. It's not. He never told us I love you, for example, growing up. We never got a hug. He learned how to hug, before he died. He learned how to hug. This is taking life by the horns. In a nice way, though. Not to fight with life, but to engage, because this is where we can make every moment, every seemingly boring, neutral moment into a significant moment. And that's what the mirror is for, by the way, right at the door, before you leave. That's why many people are surprised when they hear me say, happiness is a choice. I mean, we might have read it here and there, it's like a bumper sticker. But, have you ever tried it? By choice. I mean, we make friends like that, right? No one can impose themselves on us, demanding that we treat them or we turn them into our friends. It's not like family. I read somewhere that it's the family you're stuck with, but friends are the family that you create. Something like that. But so long as the wallet or the pocket doesn't have those $100, you won't be able to give that love. So I have to first give it to myself. This is key. Before I go ahead and point my finger outside into the world and say, you are going to give me joy. You are not giving me what I need. Which, by the way, is this. Pain, suffering. Because that means I have given the reins to life, to outside situations, circumstances. They now dictate my state of being. I'm not going to get any well-being, by the way. So, in other words, if someone were to ask, then, Bhante, what are you talking about? Could you narrow it down into a single word? Perhaps responsibility would fit. You and I are responsible for our own happiness. And that, I guarantee you, is not going to happen in the future, nor in the past. Because you cannot live in the past, nor in the future. Just like you cannot love in the future, nor in the past. Try it. Love is a present tense verb. It's not a noun. It's a feeling, it's a living, breathing, experiencing of life. So smile to yourself. And this is where Nibbana occurs, by the way. Everybody has a thought, has a concept about, oh, Nibbana is going to happen to me in the future. One day, when perhaps I'm in this kuti, in this tiny little hut, up in the mountains, in some universe, somewhere over there, not here though. Not now. Just like one day I will be able to sit for, let's say, 30 minutes or an hour, whatever my goal is. We have more of an urgency to pay our bills than we do about our own creation of sense of safety. That's another thing, by the way. When we talk about happiness, we're talking about you intelligently, wisely choosing with responsibility to give yourself what life has taken away from you, perhaps. To give yourself the joy. instead of looking for outside circumstances to give it to you. That's why I don't believe, just like my main teacher, Lord Buddha, would say, you are responsible for your own life. But it's not a passive thing. You can't sit on the passenger seat of your own life and expect things to happen and be happy, or Nibbana to come to your doorstep. That's never going to happen. You're not going to get it by worshiping the Buddha either, or doing pujas, or prostrations, or saying a certain number of mantras. None of that will work. Try it. Nobody's ever done it. Nobody's ever been able to experience Nibbana like that, because it's a personal affair. You are responsible for your happiness. But how? Somebody can ask, how, Bhante? Okay, I like it so far. You sold me on this whole concept. Tell me more. Tell me, is there a step-by-step guide? Nah, I thought you never ask. That's what Dhamma is. To my knowledge, to my experience, to my exploration of world religions over the years, this is the only one that I know that has a step-by-step guide to attaining Nibbana, which is, by the way, our graduation date in this path, in this discipline, in Vinaya of Lord Buddha's. We do have a graduation date. It's not like anything out there. There's a finish line. It's not guesswork, it's not gambling. It is very much based on hard data. And the data is coming up. Is this working so far for you? Is this okay? I see a few heads nodding, so that encourages me to go on. Karma, or kamma as we call it in Pali, in the Buddhist tradition. Kamma is often another word that is misunderstood, misinterpreted, misrepresented. At the time of Lord Buddha, obviously, he didn't invent the term karma. It was there, it was available. Unfortunately, at the time, they were, as they are today, there were two primary, in India, I'm talking in India, two very strong positions or interpretations of karma. One is that you are born with it and you cannot do anything about it. If you're born a Brahmin, wonderful. If you're born a Sudra or an untouchable, a worker, and if you notice I'm pointing downward, that is where you will stay. And there's nothing you could do in this life to lift yourself up from that status. And you have to, the most you could do is do good deeds and pay the Brahmins to do chants. They are at the top echelon of society. This was the Brahmanic position on karma. And then there was the Jain interpretation, which is a lot more almost tangible, if you will. Karma has a color, has a shape. You can almost scrape it off of you. It's called knots that you have to rid yourself of. And how do you do that? By not doing certain things. So it's very much like, don't touch this, don't touch that. I notice here in Sydney there's a lot of cameras everywhere I go. I have to really check to see if my step is appropriate, acceptable, permissible. You know, it's really interesting. So Jainism is like that. I was once at a retreat and there was a Jain gentleman, elderly gentleman, and he didn't know much about Buddhism, and there was a Burmese teacher who was in town, and he asked me if I could help him introduce some of the principles. And he suddenly had the need to go and ask the teacher something, because he saw him outside in the yard sitting on a picnic, you know, like a bench. And I said, okay, let's go. You know, I'll interpret, I'll help. And he said, you go, I can't go. I said, why not? He said, I can't step on the grass, he says. I said, oh. So he had to go all the way around the area to find a place, and interestingly enough, there was no place where there was like a walking path or something that would indicate to him that he wouldn't be stepping on grass. I thought that's very odd. It's very constricting. And Lord Buddha was very practical. Very practical. You know, people used to wear masks in those days, the Jains. They were afraid to accidentally swallow any bugs or smaller than bugs, bacteria, living organisms, accidentally to inhale them. To the point where they weren't even giving cold water to a person who was dying of fever. Nevertheless, they were okay with boiling the water and then cooling it down a little bit and giving it to the person who was dying of fever. Because it was against their rules that if you're giving the cold water to someone like that, there are tiny little microorganisms in there that you are going to be responsible for their death. Do you see the irony, the lack of logic even? But they believed by such actions they will be removing the stains, the knots of karma. So you had these two positions on karma at the time of Lord Buddha. And once you do something, that's it, that's your karma. Karma means, it comes from the Sanskrit root kiru, which means to do. So it's an action. Karma means action. What people talk about, oh, it's my karma, it's your karma, it's his karma. What they're referring to actually is kamma vipaka. Vipaka means fruit, the outcome of karma. That's what the reference is for, not the action itself. Now, Lord Buddha had to explain to them what karma is. He said, it is not just any action you commit, but intentional action. This changed the whole scene. And he introduced a term called Cetana. Cetana means willfulness, intentional. When you add it to the word kamma, it becomes intentional action. So if you, by accident, step on, let's say, a cockroach or an animal that you didn't see, guess what? You didn't do any karma as far as the Dhamma is concerned, because there was no intention. So if you were to go to Lord Buddha and ask, Bhante, forgive me, I have killed an animal, I have killed something, and he would ask, the first question would be, did you intend to kill, to damage, to harm in any way? And if your answer is no, genuinely no, he will say there's no karma. If any, it's so minute, it's insignificant. It's not enough to drag you behind, to drag it behind you. So, I just wanted to give that preamble or footnote on kamma so you have a better reference. So action, which is kamma. This is the how-to. And kamma has two types. One is wholesome, one is unwholesome. No-brainer. Right? When Lord Buddha, before he became a Buddha, he was still struggling with meditation. He said, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and look at my thoughts and look at whichever thought is unwholesome and put it in a pile, separate pile, from the thoughts that are wholesome. And I'll put those in another pile. I'll make two piles. And guess what? From now on, I'm just going to go ahead and choose from the wholesome pile. How easy is that? How simple? Not easy. How simple is that? This changed the course of history. He just picked from the kusala bag. So you have kusala, which is wholesome, and you have the akusala. A is obviously the, as I mentioned earlier, turns it into its antonym. So unwholesome. So you have these where your control part comes in. This is what we can control. You cannot control the outside circumstances. You cannot even control your own body. Not even a single hair on your body could you change. Try it. If you have gray hair or no hair, tell yourself, I'm going to grow hair that is of a different color. Or I'm going to stop myself from having wrinkles. Or my knees are never going to hurt again. Ever. We know that's idiotic. So, kusala and akusala. So, how do we commit actions? How? I mean, it might seem like a no-brainer, but and people used to come and debate with Lord Buddha on this. Again, the Jains come in, because I've been working with the suttas, and you see the Jains again and again and again trying to come and disprove of the experience and the teachings of Lord Buddha and his students. So you have the body, bodily actions. You have speech, which we call verbal actions. And then you have mental actions. Lord Buddha said this is the most important action you could commit. This was a revolutionary position to have, because everybody was looking at the most obvious, tangible, almost irrefutable, evidence-based, or, as we like to call it in the West, empirically valid type of action, which is the bodily. And that's why people say many things. And they might even look like they're doing those things. But they might be thinking the opposite. That's why one of the things that we have forgotten to look at as human beings during the past 10, 15, or maybe even more, 20 years, is to look at a person's behavior, not their words. We have become master wordsmiths. We keep mangling, in this case, the English language, coming up with things that simply spit at the face of anything that is decent. I was in Malaysia, and one of the supporters, lovely family, came, and one of their family members was going overseas to study. And I said, wow, that's great, so you're going to dorm there? She's like, yes. I said, wonderful. What are you going to study? What are you going to major in? And she said, strategic communication. And I said, wow, I've never heard of that. What is that? Could you help me? I'm ignorant in that. She said, oh, it's, could you give me an example? And she says, yes. So I'll be working in PR, in media, in different types of things. And I said, okay, that's great. So you have opportunities. And could you give me a scenario? She's like, yes. So if I were to be working in the media at a news agency, we would see something and we would say, these are truths and these are false truths. And these, I said, whoa, hold on. What was that second? False truth? How do you wrap your mind around false truth? Yeah, that's what we call it now. And I said, what happened to good old-fashioned lies? What happened? I didn't get a text or an email, we just changed it? And that's what we've come to. And we are also experts at lying to ourselves. A fellow teacher years ago, when I was in elementary school at the time, I was teaching elementary students, I went visiting one of my colleagues in her classroom, and she held her hand like this. And she said, when you're pointing your finger at something, how many fingers are pointing away from you? And the kids said, one. And she went, how many fingers are pointing back at you? The kids said 3. And if you're flexible enough, you're going to get the 4th one. We don't do that enough. We keep pointing to the situations and circumstances outside, expecting them to be life-changing for us, somehow to give us pleasure or meaning in life. That's why we meditate. That's why we practice this. It's not just sitting there like a statue and doing nothing and expecting miracles to happen. Personality transformation. That's why I don't believe in these long retreats where there is no personality transformation. It needs to happen from within the person. It's not an outside-in job. It's an inside-out job. And there is immediate impact on the person doing the so-called job. You are feeling lighter on your feet. Your heart is softer. You smile a lot easier. You're more forgiving to yourself, most importantly. And when you are truly forgiving of yourself, genuinely, you don't keep record of who did what to you. So there's a softness, because when we are not forgiving ourselves, what we're doing is basically we're nailing ourselves, anchoring out, not in a good way, anchoring ourselves in this case, the past. How could you move? How could you budge from your position? How could you move to a new relationship? Really? That's why so many people get, into that downward spiral. They keep getting stuck in the same type of relationship. And they come and say, I always keep attracting the wrong people. No, it's not the people that's the problem. You're looking after the people that fit your agenda. And your agenda happens to be your emotional lens with which you're looking upon the life that you're living, supposedly. And similarly with the future, people are full of fear. Fear, which kills life. It depletes us of life. That's why people have lost energy to do much these days. When COVID was happening, I was traveling around the world. So I would go through airports and that were empty. The huge LAX was empty. You land in Italy, it's empty, like a few people, workers there. It was understandable because it was lockdown, I get it. But afterwards, when things are coming back to so-called normal, people are still carrying so much. It's like those people sitting in a room where there's not that many people, with so many layers of masks, afraid to breathe. And if somebody by accident coughs or sneezes, oh boy. Oh boy. We laugh because we realize how ridiculous life on this planet has become for us. But we're the ones who are responsible for this, to maintain that is. At least in my mind, I will permit myself to break free from that mindset. Can I say that to myself? Can I allow myself? That's the question. Otherwise, if I'm sitting, I'm just brooding over the past or the future. I'm worried about the future. And I used to tell this to my patients. No worry has ever gotten anybody anywhere except taking drugs, getting worse. So if you keep doing the same thing, there's that saying, right? And expect different results, that's pretty much the definition of insanity, right? Keep doing the same things and somehow expecting a different result. And you know the result. So that's one of the reasons why we meditate. So I don't know what the time is. It's been an hour. But first, before I sit, perhaps there might be questions about these items on the wall. Are there any questions where I might be able to help answering or clarifying? Try to. Don't be shy. No? Okay.
Actually, I suppose I could ask a question.
Of course.
So Sukha, just wondering, its relationship to, is it mudita, sympathetic joy? Because I always thought these are things to aspire to. I mean, obviously the Brahma Viharas are something to cultivate and aspire to. I thought sukha was also, but you're saying it's an extreme to avoid?
No, that is not. I was just mentioning how the relationship of dukkha is to sukha. Yeah. People get fixated on dukkha. But sukha is one of the qualities that you will have when you're going through the jhanas. It's one of the factors. Yeah. So you need to have sukha. Yeah. It's important to have sukha. So please don't put that. Maybe I made a mistake in putting it right on top of, one of the extremes. That's not the intention. No, I'm glad you brought that up, to our attention. But that is not the case. But the Brahma Viharas definitely bring you that sense of sukha. But eventually that has to be let go of if you're practicing the Brahma Viharas correctly. Because as you're moving through the jhanas are higher states of mind, in the sense that they calm the mind down. Because of your practice, you go deep enough where your tranquility is so becoming more and more pervasive, especially when you're sitting, that you experience different levels of sukha. And joy will arise. Also, piti is another factor. And ekaggata is another factor, which is the unification of mind. Sometimes gets translated as one-pointedness. Does that play along with what you were saying? But the Brahma Viharas are extremely important. That's why it has been my focus primarily as a meditation teacher during the past actually over a decade now, because it's so powerful. Now sometimes students ask, Bhante, why don't you give us the meditation object of anapana, which is the breath? After all, Lord Buddha himself used anapana, the breathing meditation. And that's a very valid statement. And the answer to that is, we were discussing this the other day. Not all of us have all of the qualities of having perfected metta in our hearts. So we're too rigid. So being on the extreme also means rigidity. And so long as we're rigid, there's no way we will experience true, genuine happiness or sukha. For that reason, many people will go and sit for hours, sitting like this and frowning. You see the lines on the forehead. Somehow, from this state of dukkha-ness, they're hoping to find happiness. It doesn't work. It's like arithmetic, basic math. Whatever I put on one side, that's what I'm going to get on the other. Or chemistry, it's the same principle. How in the world am I expecting to find something else as a result of these wrong steps in practice? So when I mentioned how it is important for us to be responsible, we need to understand what it is that we are practicing. For that, Lord Buddha gave us the Noble Eightfold Path. The first of which is sammaditthi, which is right view. This is not a view on life, this and that. No, you have to sit down, because we don't know how long we have on this planet. How many times, by the way, do you ask yourself that? I wonder how much time I have left. Because every one of us somehow has this innate belief that it will happen to the neighbors over there first before it happens to me. Right? We're all smiling. I definitely believed that until my grandmother died. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I went looking for her in the house. She wasn't there anymore. And then other people started dying the older I got. But this is not a unique situation, because all of us, at least, in some way we have come face to face or encountered someone who has met with death. And that's the only way we're going to go out of here. That's guaranteed. That's the only exit that each of us guaranteed will be taking at the end of this life. How does that sit for you? Now, can I say that to myself without being somber or sad or angry, or now I have to go out and, I don't know, there was one teacher in India who was saying, suck the juice out of every moment. It's very easy for you to fall into the pleasure-seeking mode. There's a danger there. So sammaditthi means having the right view. Will this thing that I am pursuing, studying, exploring, practicing, will it take me there? For that reason, I always recommend people to sit for a few days. Give yourself a few days. When I was a high school teacher, students would come and say, I'm facing this dilemma. I want to choose a major for my college program. I can't. And I would ask them to do a pros and cons list, one versus the other, and then they never get anywhere with that. So I say, okay, think about the thing that you're feeling adamant about now, and see if you could wake up every morning for the next 3 days with that same goal still being strong enough in your heart as a major that you would like to pursue. But if it kind of fades, it changes, then that was not the right thing. So for 3 days, see if you wake up with that in mind, strongly in your heart, vibrating in you. And then they would come and they said, yes, or no, that wasn't it. Actually, I chose something else. And I did wake up 3 days in a row with that. So there's a personal experimentation. So if you're fighting with yourself while you're sitting, there's something wrong. While you're meditating, I mean. If you're feeling throbbing sensations in your temples, or you're frowning, or your relationships aren't getting better, there's a problem. What you're doing, or the technique itself, usually it's us, our attitude towards the technique, towards the practice, that's the problem. One time, one of the teachers was asked in a group interview setting as to basically along the lines of, am I advancing? Am I advancing? Am I advancing? Not in those words, but you get my point. And the teacher said, why are you asking me? You're here for like a 10-day retreat. I don't know you. Go ask your dog. Go ask your cat, your girlfriend, your neighbor, somebody who sees you on a daily basis. Don't ask me. They're going to be your litmus test right there. And that stuck with me. It was like, yeah, there needs to be a personality change that's demonstrably there. I can see it. I can touch it. People could point it out. And most importantly, I can feel it. Things don't bother me as much as they did. And that's why we practice the Brahma Viharas, as you were mentioning. And metta allows you to open your heart, to allow yourself to feel what it feels like to have safety, which I was saying it's lacking in today's world. When the parents are not feeling safe, or they're upset, uneasy, agitated, worried, that trickles down, definitely trickles down, 100% of the time, into the minds and the psyche of the children. And that is how and what they will be stamped by. That is their sense of security, which in this case will be insecurity. And they're going to try to spend the rest of their lives filling up that unfillable hole. It will turn into an abyss, so long as they're not asking the right questions, or they're not being pointed in the right direction. So the Dhamma is, the Buddha's teachings do offer a person that method to regain a sense of security, starting from oneself. Remember those 3 fingers pointing back at you? That's saying a lot, isn't it? Nobody has control over my happiness. That's the attitude that Lord Buddha invited for every student to have. I mean, look at his life as a young prince. He had everything. Everything that even the richest people on the planet today cannot have. Jeff Bezos today cannot have that. Elon Musk can never have that. He had them. Plus youth. Plus knowledge, understanding, the arts. Martial and otherwise. He knew poetry, for example. Sense pleasures, the 5 carnal pleasures we talk about in the suttas, nope, they didn't do it anymore for him. Why? Because he saw that it is not the pleasure-seeking modality that get us to this sense of safety. And that is what Nibbana is, if you want to know. The ultimate sense of safety, that's your graduation date. That's it. So we don't gamble, we don't do guesswork. There's no such things in the Dhamma. And that's a good thing. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions. Hopefully there are, because you've been awfully quiet.
I've got a question about joy and happiness.
Mm.
And whether joy, happiness, and youth being tranquil, are they always indicators down the right path? Are they always present? And the reason why I ask is I've come across teachings and practitioners who, I get a sense they're falling apart. And to them it's almost like a badge of honor that they're on the right path.
Sorry, just clarification. When you say they're falling apart, is it the joy or the tranquility that is falling apart, or themselves? They? Oh, how?
Suffering.
Oh, I see.
It's something that's falling apart of an old self, so to speak. Either way, it doesn't look fun to me.
Oh.
So I'm like, do I want that?
Mm.
Why am I doing this if that is where, unless there's something beyond that? Yeah.
That is not the tranquility and joy that we see in the suttas in this practice. That's not it. That's something else. Unfortunately, there's many, many ways that people have been trying to squeeze these principles and experiences into these small matchbox-like interpretations that they have, trying to capture something while looking at it from their small perspective, and interpreting, however, using these big words. That's why we have to be very careful what we're saying, and really going and checking to see if this is truly what we see in Lord Buddha's teachings. And from what you did, that's why I asked for the clarification, because from what you said, it fits the akusala section. When you said falling apart. If anything, if it's true, tranquility, which is part of the satta bojjhangas, which are the 7 factors of awakening, that's the toolbox, if you will, of attaining nibbana. Passaddhi is what you're talking about, which is tranquility. And right after that, there's samadhi. Well, it leads to upekkha, which is a necessary factor to attain nibbana, to experience nibbana, and to experience upekkha, that balance, that state of equanimity throughout your life, not fall apart. It's impossible for a person who has truly experienced tranquility and true samadhi and joy, which is the preceding factor, to fall apart. It just doesn't work. It's empty talk. And people have nowadays so many things that they can fall back on and try to interpret what they're experiencing with these lofty terms, to kind of make it mystical, to kind of make it more...
It almost feels like a badge of honor too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want is to display. Put some billboards, put some, neon lights on you and saying, I have attained this or that state. I have met some people who unfortunately even suggested after retreats that if they've reached a certain level, it is their duty to go ahead and tell their loved ones and friends that they have reached that level. And I asked him, so you're saying it's like we could also give you a business card that says Sotapanna, so-and-so, Jim Brown, Sotapanna, here you go. Oh, wait a minute, I have to scratch Sotapanna, I have to make it Sakadagami. Here you go. Nonsensical. But that is reflective of our time of mediocrity in this world today, the age of mediocrity, because we are misusing these wonderful resources. For that, we need to practice. Two things that Lord Buddha encouraged us to use as references, aside from our practice, our personal experience. The suttas, where we find the discourses, the original teachings of Lord Buddha, and the Vinaya, the code of discipline for monks and monastics, which has a lot of Dhamma within it, by the way. So you cross-reference these, and then you triangulate back to yourself and see if your experience matches what is being said. Not conjure up something new, saying, no, this is different. I'm setting a new standard. There are people who believe that a layperson can become an arahant and stay an arahant, a fourth level awakened one, fully awakened. It's impossible. Nowhere in the suttas do you see such a thing. Lay people did attain arahantship, of course, but they cannot stay an arahant.
You mean layperson?
A layperson, yes. So they have to become a monk or a nun, in robes basically, because the temptations that you had, the eyes that were looking outside for pleasures, they have died out. To the point where it becomes like a torture for such a person to stay in society as a layperson. So the protection of the robes are necessary for such a being. But you have people walking around with gold jewelry, watches, nicely coiffed hair, lay people claiming that they are arahants. They have a website, they have a YouTube channel, good for you, you go ahead. And you will soon attract people who fall for that. But many people don't have the time to go ahead and study the suttas. Does that?
Yeah. Therefore, for me, the more I practice, the joy should get more and more refined. Is that right? So it's always there, but in a different kind of way.
Yes and no.
Right.
Let me just take a sip.
It just helps to have a signpost.
Of course. And that's exactly what it is. I'm glad you just hit it on the head, just right there. Because joy is that. It's a gift, yes, but it's also a signpost, which is very important for both yourself and especially the teacher to know and gauge where you're at and how to tweak the progress, to tweak the technique and add suggestions and guidance. So joy, yes, it is there, but it doesn't stay. It comes and goes depending on, you can bring it up, of course, like especially if you're drowsy, when you're hit with sluggishness or feeling the sloth and torpor bit, which are hindrances in the meditation. In those instances, you can bring up piti, which is joy. And that is, I always say, it's going to give you at least 1 extra hour of sitting, at the very least. And a beautiful sitting. You're just going to be like this, so and a big smile on your face. But it doesn't stay like that. Because maybe I should do a quick diagram. Yes, okay. Okay. It helps to know, because sometimes, I might speak fast, or it's good to have the visual. So I mentioned the Bojjhangas, which are the 7 factors of awakening, and briefly, and so we start with sati, Dhamma Vichaya, which is investigation of states. Then we have virya. Then we have piti, which is the joy. Then we have passaddhi, which is tranquility of mind. Then we have samadhi. And then finally we have upekkha. So upekkha is equanimity. So what you were mentioning about the joy factor. So these are, I always encourage people to think of it as a seesaw. It's always in a wobbly state when we're meditating. Most often people who are very zealous, they will put a lot of energy. We call it the virya portion. Efforting, as I said in the beginning. So especially we go very like gung-ho in meditation. It's very militaristic. I'm going to sit through these 10 days. I'm going to push myself. That's not the healthy way of sitting. That is lopsided. So that has to be balanced with the tranquility factor. So tranquility. Sorry. So tranquility has to come in and balance it. That's where the seesawness of it comes in. Lord Buddha says, when you have masterfully balanced all these, the 7 here, at that moment there is nibbana. At that moment there is release from suffering. Awakening takes place. Now you mentioned piti. What I also need to clarify here is that we can divide this 7 factors of awakening into 2 groups. Okay, there's the activating or energizing group, and there is the tranquilizing, calming group. So here you can think of the Dhamma Vichaya, which is investigation of states. Maybe I should write that in English. And then you have the vidya, which is effort or persevering effort. It's very hot. It's the thing. It's the fuel that you need to sit and to look. Even investigation requires fuel to see if, okay, am I drowsy or am I not? So even maintaining sati requires that. And then you have piti, which is joy. This is a spiritual kind of joy. It's not the normal joy that you would get. Because this is the highest form of joy. And that's in the Satta Bojjhangas. So now, so this would be the, calming group here.
And can you elaborate on what you mean by spiritual joy?
Yes. So you could divide, I had one person divided into 5 types of joy. So there's one where, you know, you have a cat, let's say, or a dog, and you're sitting there after a long day and working, and the dog comes and sits next to you, cuddles next to you, and or the cat does, and you're just like, oh, this is nice. That's a sense of joy. Or when the person is walking through the desert, scorching heat, and finally they get to some safety and somebody offers them a cool oasis or even a glass of fresh water. That's a different kind of joy. It's getting more and more personal. It's getting more visceral. So in this case, the spiritual kind of joy, it is not necessarily related with the body, the 5 senses. It's deeper than that. It's very subtle. And it is longer lasting. In fact, one of the best ways to know it is the spiritual kind of joy is that it brings right after. It's kind of calmed down. It's sedated itself. It's not as strong, the joy. Piti shows up. Every single time. It never happens that you have piti and right after it you don't feel this calmness, tranquility. So that's what we have here. Tranquility, and then samadhi, which is the collectedness of mind. Which, by the way, if you noticed, it follows tranquility. So as the mind calms down, right after that there is the collectedness of mind that sits in. This is opening the doorway for wisdom to occur. You have insights at this point, because the mind is now in upekkha, which is equanimity. So if you notice, so this is the, this is not calming group, my apologies, this is the activating group, or energizing. So here we have the calming. If you notice, sati, I didn't list it. Sati is the captain of the ship. Sati is the one that tells where and what needs to happen. Whatever's wrong, whatever is too much emphasized, is too much weight on, let's say I was saying piti. Sati is the one that comes in and says, hey, tone it down. Tone it down. Or too much tranquility, and you don't want tranquility to be the loudest when you are experiencing sleepiness, because it's going to put you into sleep. You don't want that. That's why you need the activating energy of piti, or at least vidya, or investigation. So sati is the guide. Sati is the one that's sitting in the middle, the fulcrum. Think of it as the fulcrum of the seesaw, right? That's sati, right here. So sati is the boss. That's why we practice mindfulness, eventually to get it to this level. So it is impossible for a person to truly experience piti, and then tranquility, and somehow drop out. Start doing or feeling lousy. Because you definitely will feel it's changing you to the better. To the better. Otherwise, this tradition would have died out long time ago. Would have died out a long time ago. But it hasn't. We're just talking about it. Does that answer your question? Any other thoughts about this? Okay. Any other questions? I know it's middle of the week. Yes?
It's not necessarily something to do with your talk, but my question to myself is like, why Buddhism? Because I'm kind of inspired something about Buddhism, and I really anyway. So you have a background in psychology, and in previous talks there was something about the cosmology of Buddhism, and there's a heavens and those sorts of things. And anyway, one could view, possibly it's my interpretation, but one could think it as a psychological landscape or something. Like a psychological, like hell is like a psychological hell. I don't know. But anyway, maybe perhaps it's my view. But if you could tell me like why Buddhism, is a different ways to view or try to heal things like psychology, for example.
So your question is, why does Buddhism get to be elected as a method to be used as a psychological tool?
If I can ask, why are you doing Buddhism?
Why am I interested in Buddhism?
Why you chose to...
Personally? As a child, I tasted suffering pretty badly. And it was basically, I was injured in a mortar attack took place, and a mortar fell in a rocket, basically, that's supposed to be used between armies at front lines, but they targeted the residential areas, so it fell just in front of our house, and I was sitting right there at the entrance of our balcony, and it blew up and all the shrapnel came inside, and I was injured, both my foot and my head, so it was open, so I lost my portion of my foot. So it brought me close to death. So all that illusion about life, this, that, constantly I had to really negotiate whatever I was being told by the school, by life, by advertisements, by the cartoons, and the reality that I was experiencing in my life. So philosophically, I became more alert as a child. So being brought up as a Christian, I went through the Bible. I devoured every single page of the whole Bible twice. And I couldn't find what I was looking for, but I said, okay, maybe I should go and become a monk, Christian monk. So I went and joined the seminary at 15, without my parents knowing. They agreed eventually, so I stayed there for the rest of the seminary years. But I had more questions raised during that time. So I wasn't getting a step-by-step guide of how to reduce my suffering. And everybody was asking me basically to have faith in them blindly, to believe in things. And the thing is, the problem was that my father always taught us never to believe anyone. So I was negotiating that with, these things that were coming in my direction as promises for happiness. So I didn't, subscribe to that idea that I have to believe in something blindly to gain happiness. So I wanted to experience and see it step by step, in a step-by-step way. So I explored other religions over the years. And Buddhism is it.
Did the psychology help?
It did help to understand how Lord Buddha was the first one to designate mental health. The term mental illness comes from Lord Buddha. I didn't know that. As a psychotherapist, even though I was studying Buddhism and I even had advanced degrees in it, but I'd never seen that ever since, until I came to the suttas. And I saw how he's calling it out. He's calling out the physical pain as physical pain, but he's also calling out mental pain. Nobody else talked about that at his time, and until Western psychology coined it. So, but many of the tools that you see, especially the first verse of the Dhammapada I mentioned, mind is the forerunner of all states, especially the evil ones. In the first verse is dedicated to the evil, to show us how we are responsible for our unwholesome thoughts. Unwholesome actions are led by unwholesome thoughts. That also includes when the mind is not alert. And there's a term, it's called ayoniso manasikara, which means unwise attention. That's what we have today. Because of our unwise attention, we're directing our gaze, our attention, just like a German shepherd, perked ears, just looking, seeing where's the next panic button is going to hit. What's the next big thing that I need to be terrorized by? Going to come up. When? Where? How? Now that creates tremendous agitation in the heart and the mind. That will create in you mental illness first, to which will follow the physical illness. So to see this again and again and again, you're just blown away, and it's like, wow, that makes you think twice. So even as a psychologist, I'm a clinical psychotherapist. So there's clinical psychologists, this and that. They do more assessments. Our work is more geared towards working with people. Relational work is what our niche is. We work with people. We talk. Mostly we listen and offer tools that could help. And in my work, even before becoming a bhikkhu, a monk, Buddhist monk, I was doing my work, clinical psychotherapy work, without my patients knowing that I was practicing Dhamma with them, offering them tools of Dhamma. They didn't care because they were getting a lot of metta, mudita. Also, sila, which you don't see much emphasis in other paths, or especially in psychology. Today, everybody talks about, earlier we were talking about mindfulness and how they've monetized it, even weaponized it. But it is completely excised, cut out, extricated from anything that is sila, virtue. That's why it doesn't work. That's why a person who goes and gets therapy, where the therapist is giving them mindfulness exercises, sooner than later, at the most 8 or 10 months, poof, the whole thing comes apart. Because the person has been practicing akusala lifestyle. Their behavior was wrong. It was bringing them more suffering. So psychology today is like a bird with one wing. It cannot go far. So with the help of the Dhamma, I was able to help so many people, and they didn't know what Dhamma was. They didn't know that I was talking Buddhism. It really doesn't matter. The kindness, the humanity, the connectivity, the relational work that I've seen how Lord Buddha uses in communicating with his students, with the public. It's mind-blowingly beautiful. And it's very relevant today, which is missing. That's why my insistence on focusing more on metta, because it will take you straight to Nibbana. As it says in the Metta Karaniya Sutta. He says, he who practices, or whoever practices metta fully, correctly, will never enter another mother's womb again. Wow. Not to belittle how beautiful that is. You will never enter, and you will never experience suffering again. Hence, the beauty of metta. And it will change you. You will experience all these things. The gentleman had to leave, but... So, any other thoughts, questions before we conclude? I think, yeah, it's time. Time flies. Okay. Let us transfer some merits first. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahittika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasanang. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahittika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desanang. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahittika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mamparanti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well. May the Triple Gem bless you and all your loved ones. May suffering find another path when it sees you. And may your desire to come in here, listen to the Dhamma, really strengthen your aspirations in the Dhamma until it takes you straight to Nibbana. In this very life, Lord Buddha calls it Ditteva Dhamme, in this very birth. It's nothing out there in another life. There's no delay, there's no another life over there in a heavenly realm. No, we're here now, and there is still Dhamma. There is still genuine Dhamma today. Why not use it to go all the way? So I wish that upon you all.